Hi, I'm Steve Gross, and welcome to the Fundamentals of Hostage Negotiating course. Our objectives are to identify the philosophy of crisis negotiation, the types of situations you'll run into, and core negotiating concepts. We want to discuss your priorities out there when you're involved in a negotiation, common errors in the philosophy of negotiation. Number one is self-control. The only aspect of a crisis situation that we have absolute control over is our own emotions. When confronted with a difficult subject, the first step is not to control his behavior, but to control your behavior. If you can't control yourself, you can't control the situation. So there's an approach. The approach is don't confuse getting even with getting what you want. Work towards de-escalation of the confrontation in order to lower tension. You have to focus on the process to satisfy each side's needs rather than the outcome to have a victory. You know, the subject may be under the influence of one or more of the following emotions: anger, frustration, fear, confusion, depression. So give the subject a hearing. People want to be understood. Yes, yet the most effective concession you can make is to show respect, empathy, to see through the eyes of the other. Empathy ends up absorbing tension. Quote, let me be sure I heard what you just said. Or quote, I can understand how you'd be upset over whatever, end of quote. Empathy. Being right is not the issue. Making the attempt to get it right is. Your tone indicates your attitude. This speaks louder than your words. A calm, controlled demeanor may be more effective than a brilliant argument. There's a process. Listen to him. Acknowledge his point. Don't equate to agreement. Agree wherever you can, but without conceding. Find the common ground. Create a positive atmosphere for problem solving. Don't argue. Remember, people don't always say what they mean. Attempt to listen for the meaning, which is an unsatisfied need. Negotiators are not in the business of meeting demands, but rather of satisfying needs. Obstacles to an agreement, unsatisfied needs, fear of losing face, not vested in a solution, not ready to reach an agreement. There's an inclination to resist perceived aggression. There's a sense of being misunderstood, mistreated, feeling aggrieved and maligned. Don't forget to address basic human needs. Security, physical and emotional. Recognition, his view needs to be understood. Control, feeling that he has some say. Dignity, saving face. Accomplishment, that he's achieved something. Now there's a classic law enforcement response. We call it the linear approach. And here it is. First, we try to talk it out, means ask him, and then we use force to take him out. We make him do what we want him to do. Now, the linear application of force results in strong resistance. It's not the way we want to go. Proper law enforcement response is a parallel application. The recommended approach is to use the two primary components in synchronization during a hostage or barricade situation for maximum effect. Contrast the benefits of reaching an agreement through negotiation with the risks of disagreement potentially leading to a tactical intervention. Tactics don't just follow failed negotiations. Proper use of tactics encourages negotiations. So law enforcement attitudes can be a recipe for failure. Emotion, haste, rigidity. Instead, use strength, creativity, flexibility. Patience and restraint does not equal weakness. Avoid the action imperative. There are two basic types of incidents in hostage situations. The person where he's held to force fulfillment of certain demands upon a third party. There's a threat of harm unless demands are met. The hostage is held as leverage. And then you have non-hostage situations. The person is held for expressive reasons, no substantive demands. The person is a victim. It's a homicide to be. So hostage situation should be goal-oriented, substantive demands, usually including escape. Now, this generally involves purposeful behavior. So you need the police to facilitate their demands. Having demands met is a primary motivation, the first of which is not harming hostages. Realization that keeping hostages alive prevents tactical action. Now, when you have non-hostage situations, we see expressive ventilation, emotional, senseless, or self-destructive behavior, no clear goal, lack of substantive demands, or unrealistic demands, no escape demands, absence of rational thinking. It's primarily driven by anger, rage, or frustration. They need nothing from the police. Their focus is directed against the person held. Person being held is a victim, not a hostage. Many situations are actually pseudo-hostage incidents. There's a potential of a homicide followed by suicide, and this is considered a high possibility. There's a behavioral continuum. Behavior, instrumental, expressive focus, emotional ventilation, rational, no clear goal, goal-driven is substantive demands, non-substantive, senseless demands. Critical assessment, is the person held as a hostage or a victim? The subject's perspective is the key issue. How does the subject view them? As a hostage for use as leverage to achieve his demand, or as a victim against whom he directs his aggression? Strategies and techniques. It's very important to employ active listening skills, ALS. These are the foundational skills for both hostage and non-hostage situations. Emotion, labeling, identify the feeling, use sounds, quote unquote, you seem, quote unquote, I hear, quote unquote, or paraphrasing. Put meaning into your own words. Reflective, mirroring, the gist, the last couple of words, repeat them. Effective pauses, silence, immediately before or after saying something meaningful. Minimal encouragers, indicate your presence. Okay, etc. I messages, I feel, quote unquote, when you, quote, because, comma, and open-ended questions. What, quote unquote, when, quote unquote, how, quote unquote, or tell me more about, quote unquote. I'd like to hear more about, quote unquote. In addition to ALS, frequently summarize the conversational conversation. Periodically, repeat his story and his feelings in your words. Let me just make sure I understand what you're saying. In hostage situations, stall for time. Lower the subject's expectations. The subject will initially feel powerful and in control. Utilize delaying tactics. The subject will begin to realize he's not in control, nor does he have all the power. Initiate, give and take, bargaining. Make him work for everything he gets. Build trust and rapport. Higher profile containment to show police willingness to use force if necessary. Encourage and facilitate peaceful surrender. The subject's desire to live is a key factor. Unless he's suicidal, the subject will eventually accept peaceful alternatives. Now, in non-hostage situations, buy time, project understanding of the problem and his feelings about it. Be non-threatening and non-judgmental. Avoid manipulation of anxiety. And there are techniques. Remember, restraint is not a weakness. Beware of the action imperative. Lower emotions, diffuse anger. Attempt to return subject to a more rational thinking. Build trust and rapport. Introduce nonviolent problem-solving alternatives. Demonstrations of good faith may help build rapport. Lower profile containment to show peaceful intentions. Incident dynamics. Now, hostage situations present greater opportunity for police to control the incident and influence the subject's behavior, as opposed to non-hostage situations present less of an opportunity for the police to exert control and influence over the subject's behavior. Hostage situations generally support highly visible police containment and a threat of force. Buying time and exhaustive bargaining lower the subject's expectations and usually lead to surrender, whereas non-hostage situations are often made much worse by a confrontational police profile that threatens and agitates the subject. This approach causes a defensive response that inhibits building trust and rapport and may escalate the conflict. Non-threatening, active listening skills, ALS, employed in a non-confrontational manner yield the best results. Decision-making considerations. Base decisions on the action criteria. Is the contemplated action necessary? Is the contemplated action risk-effective? Is the complicated action acceptable? We must answer timing questions. Why did we take this action now? What conditions have changed from earlier? Were less risky alternatives tried? Negotiation priorities. It's a preservation of life of law enforcement personnel. That's the first priority. Hostage victim. Okay, subject, apprehension of the subject, recovery and protection of property. Let's talk about now the courses of action in a hostage situation. We can contain it, isolate it, and negotiate. We have tactical options, chemical agents like tear gas, snipers, forced entry. Now, what's the purpose of containment? To prevent the spread of the threat, to mitigate the harmful effects of the threat on persons and property, to prevent the escape of the subjects, to prevent the entry of unauthorized persons into the crisis site, to isolate the subject from the outside world, to put pressure on the subject. Verbal containment. Contact is subject as soon as possible to, number one, occupy the subject in order to keep them from harming the victims. Reduce the likelihood he'll fire on the police. Project a calm, professional police demeanor. Provide opportunity to respond to his concerns or demands. Help minimize misunderstandings and reduce confusion. Suggested negotiator introduction. My name is whatever. No rank or title. I am with thee and law enforcement agency, you fill in. I would like to help. Common means of communication. Telephone, talk from cover, written note, bullhorn, exposed face-to-face, cover, a body bunker versus concealment, shrubbery. Elements needed for successful negotiations. Well, number one, the subject must want to live. Containment, communication between subject and authorities. A leader or decision-making process among the subjects. A negotiator who indicates a willingness to help. Time, unified strategy between negotiation and tactical components. All police elements must convey a consistent theme. Negotiators' words and tactical personnel actions must convey the same message. Non-threatening negotiations may be undermined by a simultaneous demonstration of force. The subject's perception of the incident is very important. All actions must be considered on the basis of their impact upon the subject. The subject's perceptions are really what counts. What does he think we are attempting to do? Innocent police activity, movement may be viewed as threatening or provocative to an emotional and frightened subject. What is generally negotiable? Well, food, drinks, always non-alcoholic, money, small dollar amounts, access to the media, specific medical attention, such as prescription drugs, contact with family or friends. But we have to exercise appropriate caution and control. And it can be used as a reward for surrender. Now, what's non-negotiable? Weapons, illicit drugs, total escape, exchange of hostages, changing the threat level, which can be a ploy or an audience for suicide. Transportation. Now, going mobile creates problems with command and control, communication with the subject, and it creates a danger to the community. It can be discussed, but should be granted only in extreme circumstances to facilitate a tactical resolution. Many topics can be discussed without actually making concessions. Be flexible, be creative, stall for time, increase basic human needs, reduces stress and anxiety, and increases rationality. Time may allow the subject and victim to develop more of a relationship. So let's talk about now stalling techniques. Use number one, active listening skills, ALS. Allow the subject to vent. Identify and discuss the subject's feelings and emotions. Increase the opportunities for hostages to escape. Now, stalling for time also permits better decision making through the gathering of intelligence. It allows the formation of negotiator, criminal rapport. The subject's expectations are reduced. Discuss everything in detail, but use common sense. Speak slowly and calmly. Repeat the subject's statements for clarification. Now, concerns about the passage of time. Well, you have this action imperative, pressure for a resolution. So that's one of the concerns. Then you also have exhaustion and boredom, creeping up, the creeping up effect. The officers don't take cover as well, etc. Or injuries or illness. There are problems with staffing, adequate relief of the officers, inconvenience of the city, traffic flow, etc. Media and public pressure deadlines. Attempt to dissuade the subject from setting deadlines. Contact the subject prior to the deadline. Talk the subject through the deadline. Avoid referring to the subject's deadline. Don't set a deadline on yourself. Use the excuse of crisis and chaos. Blame the brass and red tape, the delays and misunderstandings. Log all demands and inform the command structure. Demands. Be open-minded and flexible in dealing with demands. Let the subject make the first offer. Avoid saying no outright. Repeat the subject's demands, but soften or reframe them. Attempt to get something in return for anything provided. Don't raise the subject's aspirations or expectations. Don't give too much too soon. Don't ask for demands. Don't bring up old demands unless it's to your advantage. Be prepared to suggest alternatives. Make the subject work for everything he received in a bargaining interaction. Don't dismiss any demand as trivial. All agreements must be authorized by the on-scene commander, the OSC, prior to implementation. Negotiation suggestions. Take your time. Establish contact as soon as reasonably possible, considering safety and control. Ask the subject if he's all right. Ask if anyone is injured or ill. Verbalize commitment to a peaceful resolution. Provide a reality check. No one's going to come in, but we aren't leaving either. Communication ideas. Use active listening skills. Be yourself. Speak slowly and calmly. Choose your words, tone, and manner with care. Downplay what the subject has done so far. Be supportive when the subject is rational. If you're not sure what the subject meant, ask. Avoid saying no, but lower expectations, as in saying, quote, I'll pass that on, but I know it's going to be a problem, end of quote. Critical time frames. The two most critical time frames for the safety of the hostages are, one, the initial hostage-taking confrontation. During a tactical entry to rescue the hostages, we have to be concerned about the Stockholm Syndrome. Although each individual's reaction to being taken hostage is unique, there are some specific behaviors that may occur that can influence events. Such behavior is referred to as the Stockholm Syndrome. The Stockholm Syndrome may consist of one or more of the following. Hostages begin to display negative feelings towards the authorities. Hostages begin to identify with their captors. Hostage takers begin to develop positive feelings towards their hostages. There are several factors that affect the development of the Stockholm Syndrome. Fear and feeling helpless are the most important factors. Intensity of the situation. Time may have an effect. Contact with the captors. Positive contact increases the potential for developing the Stockholm Syndrome. The most significant factors that will negate the Stockholm Syndrome: negative contact and or physical abuse, observing the subject's violence against others, and isolation from captors. Negotiators' relationship with the hostages. Avoid raising the perceived value of the hostages by talking about them too much. Always keep the Stockholm Syndrome in mind when talking to the hostages. Be wary of any intelligence provided by hostages. Do not share any plans or strategies. Assume the subject is listening or will interrogate the hostage/victim. Always be aware that the hostages will not like or will not understand the fact that the negotiator is bargaining for their lives and frequently does not seem to be paying much attention to them. Indicators of progress. Content of subject's communication. Shifts from threatening, violent language to non-threatening language. The subject's disclosure of personal information. The shift from emotional to rational content. Willingness to discuss topics unrelated to the ongoing incident. form of subjects' communications, lower voice level, less rapid speech pattern, conversations of increasing length, increased willingness or desire to speak with the negotiator or authorities. Other indications of progress: reduction of violent behavior, hostage releases or deadlines passing without incident, rapport developing between negotiator and the subjects, increased willingness of the subject to follow negotiator suggestions. Plan and prepare for content of contact. Prepare a checklist of objectives and ideas. Role play what you want to say and how you will say it. Anticipate the subject's responses and tactics. Have relevant intelligence data at hand. Situation boards. Attempt to be the caller. Demonstrate interest in a peaceful resolution of the situation. Select a location for the negotiation operation center, the NOC, where you can concentrate and avoid distractions. Communication tactics. Discipline yourself to listen. You learn more by listening than talking. Summarize negotiations periodically. Demonstrate empathy. This builds rapport. It uses time. It provides feedback and reduces errors. Alter, soften demands. Repackage the issues. Negotiators view. Repackage the issue, negotiators view. Record the negotiations. Provide a valuable aid to negotiations. The ability to immediately review the recording for content and tone of conversation. Valuable piece of evidence. It's a value of the subject's mental state, of threats against the hostage and the victim, of previous crimes. It documents the fact you did everything you could for research and analysis, for training purposes. Consider the pros and cons of using manual voice and line-activated tape recordings. Be aware of state laws that govern the taping of telephone conversations. Expose face-to-face considerations. Number one, not too early in the situation. Assess your own anxiety. Elicit a promise of negotiator safety, not with a gun pointed at you. Do not ever turn your back on the subjects. Always leave yourself an escape route. Exchange physical descriptions before face-to-face contact. Be aware of body space concerns. Be aware of eye contact. Attempt to maintain adequate cover. Always wear body armor. Consider carrying your weapon. Closely coordinate with tactical backup. Never when there is an indication of explosives being present. Always obtain prior on-scene command or OSC authority. Consider the benefits versus the risks. Certainly avoid, if possible, any potential problem words or phrases. Be alert for any words or phrases which may draw emotional responses. For example, words like hostage negotiator, hostage surrender, give up, SWAT team, jail, prison, end it, kill, shoot, crime, sentence, dead, institution. Give me your best shot. Your own tone, demeanor, and projected sincerity are more important than any single phrase, good or bad. Be genuine. Remember, you can go back to negotiations after a verbal mistake, but it is hard to go back to negotiating following a tactical mistake. Non-responsive situations. The subject may not be responding for a number of reasons. Maybe he cannot hear or understand you. Maybe he has mental or physical problems, psychological disorders. It may be a form of denial. There may be drugs or alcohol involved, illness, injury or wounds, physical handicaps, to avoid detection, arrest, and incarceration. In a domestic situation, subject may have strong feelings. Quote, "I've done nothing wrong," end quote. Subject may be suicidal. Additional reasons for a non-response. Subject may be deceased. Subject may have already fled the scene. Subject may never have been there. Subject may be asleep. Suggested approaches to non-responsive situations. Be prepared to engage in one-way dialogue. Begin by making reassuring and non-threatening statements to the subject. Avoid just repeating requests for the subject to make contact. Anticipate the subject's emotions and label them, such as, quote, "I know you must be frightened, but we are not here to harm you," end of quote. Suggest various methods of response to the subject. Remember, just because he isn't responding doesn't mean he isn't listening. The boss as a negotiator. Command of the entire situation. Loss of objectivity. Loss of a potential stalling tactic. The ultimate authority. Continuity of rapport. Boss comes and goes. Assertive personality. Recent street experience. Negotiators don't command, and commanders don't negotiate when to call a timeout. To review what was heard or learned. To analyze any changes in demands. To review strategies and tactics. Explore possible alternative approaches. Develop more persuasive statements. Think of specific questions to ask. Determine how to react to new demands or developments. To discuss identified issues with negotiating team, mental health consultants, command element, tactical personnel. Discuss possible concessions, strategies, to review policy or law, to rest potential problem areas with the media, problems, live coverage of SWAT, sniper/observers and others, use of telephoto lens, use of night vision equipment, parabolic shotgun microphones, broadcast of false or inflammatory information, reports of interviews with witnesses, families of the hostage and/or victims, and released hostages. Suggested remedies. Appoint a designated media liaison. Establish a media area. Provide timely updates. Crisis Negotiating Team, CNT, should review all media releases. Identify, avoid potential problem areas. Remember, we may be able to communicate with the subjects indirectly through the media. The surrender phase. Slow it down. The subjects may want to surrender, but not know how to go about doing it. The subject may experience high anxiety due to uncertainty of the future. Emphasize what has to be gained by coming out now. Ask what assurances he needs to come out. Involve the subject in the surrender plan. He now has a vested interest in the plan. plays to a sense of control over his destiny. Ask the subject for feedback on the proposed plan. Help the subject to visualize the process of a safe and orderly exit from the crisis site. Paint a verbal picture of the process. The negotiator may be required to suggest scenarios and to talk the subject out. So go step by step. Continue to say, when you come out, quote unquote, not, quote, if you come out. Discuss the arrest plan with the tactical team early in the incident. Structure the plan for flexibility. The plan may need to be changed as the situation evolves. Never take the weapon from the subject's hand. Have him place it in a safe place. If the subject is surrendering to the negotiator should very carefully coordinate all movement with the tactical personnel, including snipers. Negotiators should always remain behind cover and have tactical backup and protection. Negotiators' voice may serve as a stimulus to exit the crisis site. Remember, the subject needs to be allowed to save face and remain with some level of dignity. Negotiator selection. Street and life experiences have a good verbal expression, an active listener, good verbal expression. He should be a successful interviewer, a successful informant operator, a team player, emotionally stable and physically fit, flexible, mature. He should remain calm under stress, should be familiar with SWAT tactics. He should not have command or additional responsibilities during the incident. Effect of negotiations on negotiators. Negotiators may experience stress-related symptoms. Number one, identification with subject or victim. Number two, loss of objectivity, fear of failure. Number three, fear of criticism, physical and psychological manifestations of anxiety, exhaustion, exceeding a negotiator's authority, assuming too much credit for wins, assuming too much blame for losses. Abnormal reactions to abnormal situations are normal. Use the power of the team to address difficult situations. Negotiations, it ends up being a team sport. In order to address adverse effects, ensure a timely debriefing of participants. Identify and process issues. Ventilate, don't medicate, ventilate. Remember, every subject has free will and his actions will more or less control how a situation is resolved. Negotiating with terrorists. Fundamental crisis negotiation principles still apply. Point out that their point has already been made. Their cause has been aired to the world. Their demands have been heard. Point out that killing innocent people will discredit them and their cause in the eyes of the world. Willingness versus wanting to die. Don't be intimidated by political rhetoric. Use of a third-party intermediaries, TPIs, may be effective. You must create the impression that they have achieved something. Avoid preconceived notions about terrorist behavior. They may be inaccurate. Deal only with actual behavior. Remember that the terrorists have human fears and failings too. Negotiating the high-risk situation delays the subject's actions. Verbal containment, quote unquote. Develop additional intelligence. This may increase options. Allow time for the tactical team to prepare, rehearse. This allows time for additional resources to arrive. It sets up the subject psychologically, and it may prove to be a negotiable situation. Negotiation team errors, operational issues, lack of communication between negotiating team and tactical elements, particularly during deliveries, releases and surrenders, lack of trust, quote unquote, between negotiator and tactical teams due to the lack of understanding, inadequate intelligence gathering and dissemination, allowing primary negotiator to handle an exposed, quote unquote, face-to-face surrender, allowing psychological consultant to become primary negotiator, failure to protect the negotiation team from unnecessary intrusion, failure of negotiation team leader to provide the on-scene commander with specific assessments and recommendations, failure to brief relief personnel on the significant events from the preceding shift, reluctance of a primary negotiator to be replaced, feeling of failure if subject commits suicide, feeling of failure if the hostages or victims or law enforcement personnel die, inadequate selection criteria and procedures, inadequate number of trained negotiators, failure to provide continued updated training, failure to train all team members on the equipment, failure to schedule sufficient training exercises, failure to train exercise with other law enforcement agencies, command issues, lack of crisis management training on the part of the on-scene commander, the OSC, fear of loss of control to negotiators by the OSC, over-involvement, direct involvement in negotiations by the OSC, inappropriate constraints on negotiating team due to a lack of understanding of strategies and techniques, lack of trust of negotiation and tactical teams due to lack of operational knowledge. OSC can fail to use a parallel application of the two primary components, negotiations, tactical. OSC fails to recognize the tactical role of the negotiation team. Negotiation success equals controlling our emotions, accurate assessment of the situation, using active listening skills, be genuine, be non-threatening, demonstrate understanding, de-escalate the tension. Remember to be creative, flexible, patient. The best negotiator is a good listener. The end.